This week in the enterprise security news, Palo Alto Networks announces cloud-native security platforms, a platform for cloud-native security. Akamai launches a new API security tool. SentinelOne secures a patent for its unique approach to uncovering exploits in their initial payload stage. Splunk helps security teams modernize and unify their security operations in the cloud. And AgileOne predictive analytics scoring helps organizations identify, prioritize, and quantify cybersecurity risks. In the second segment, we welcome Ed Bellis, the co-founder and CTO at Kenna Security, to discuss prioritization to prediction vulnerability research series. In our final segment, we welcome back Corey Bodzin, CTO at Deepwatch, to talk about Deepwatch Lens Score and Series B. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Detecting and responding to threats in the cloud is harder than doing it on-prem. Even when you do have the visibility you need, legacy security workflows weren't designed for the speed and complexity of cloud environments. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to spot threats across the hybrid attack surface, provide detailed investigation steps, and help you automate response. Request your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Today's networks are changing fast, and employees' devices and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 203 of Enterprise Security Weekly for October 21st, 2020. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman.
Happy Wednesday. It's the middle of the week. Another middle of the week.
The Mr. John Strand tried to join us, but he had other stuff going on, so he had to drop. He tried. He made an effort. It's good. Hopefully he'll be back with us next week. Would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Do you want to hear from Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcast and technical trainings? Have a question for one of our illustrious hosts or someone from the Security Weekly team? Or really just wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community? You can subscribe to your favorite podcast catcher, sign up for our mailing list, and join our Discord server to stay in the loop all things Security Weekly at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Security Weekly, in partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15-year anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly, which we'll be doing live. You can visit securityweekly.com/unlocked. You can view the agenda. That's right. We have a full agenda, well, almost full agenda. At least our talk selections are in there. Some of the panels are still being fleshed out. You can find that on securityweekly.com/unlocked and register for free for the conference. All righty. On to the enterprise security news for this week. Where do you want to start, Matt?
Well, we can go through the funding announcements quickly and then get into the meat of the product announcements, maybe.
Sure. Sunray announces a $20 million Series B.
Yes, we briefed with Sunray, I think it was RSA Conference 2019. Mm-hmm. And back then they had just kind of started. So now they're in their Series B to build out what they call it. It's their DIG product. And it's really an identity and governance kind of play in the cloud. When you first look at their website, you're like, okay, they do cloud security, but exactly what? what it really boils down to is kind of understanding cloud identity, data governance, and kind of the interrelationships of that in your cloud environments. Interesting. I mean, we know it's difficult to understand based on the different cloud assets that you have, what data is in the cloud, where is it, what services, the identity side of the cloud is pretty difficult. They're trying to simplify that. And so they got an extra $20 million investment is their Series B. I think that's about $38.5 million all in their 2 rounds so far.
4IQ raises $30 million in a Series C.
Yes. These guys have been around for a while. We've seen them in various places. Again, identity focused. They talk about their ID lake. We're going to talk about data lakes, I think, maybe a little later in one of the other segments a bit. But it's really around a couple of their products called ID Theft and ID Hunt. So they're trying to protect some of the digital identities out there as well. Series C, so obviously they're still growing. I didn't look at what their total investment was, but this round was $30 million.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting, it's a data problem, right? But they say they collect identity records from data breaches and leaks found in open sources on the surface, social, deep, and dark web, and then go see if your identities are out there. I don't disagree with the strategy necessarily. I think a smaller component to many people's security programs.
Yeah, and you already have products like LifeLock and others already doing aspects of that. So where's the real difference with what some of those other ID theft protection products are doing?
Right. Yeah, that's one where the comprehensiveness matters, and it can be difficult to measure. Some of the feedback I've heard in the past is, well, yeah, we engaged with those companies, but they didn't find anything. I'm like, well, that's good, right? But it's hard to measure the effectiveness of those programs because it is so specific to how comprehensive their data lakes are, basically, right?
Right. Yep, exactly. This third raise in this announcement, full disclosure, Accurix is a sponsor. I'm an advisor. This is Sachin. Sasha and I were together at Layered Insight. This is his next company after the Layered Insight acquisition. Accurix raised $20 million Series A with Clear Sky in the mix. This is a great investment. I love what these guys are doing. They're looking at your infrastructure as code, and they're looking for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations before you actually deploy the infrastructure in the cloud, and then monitor that live cloud environment for drift against your preset configuration template. So it's a really interesting solution. I love what these guys are doing, which is why I'm an advisor, but they did raise a $20 million Series A. So congratulations to Sasha and the team.
Yeah, congrats. That's awesome. I do love their problem that they solve and the point of view, and the execution is awesome. Palo Alto Networks announces a cloud-native security platform, Prisma Cloud 2.0. According to the announcement, because we always wonder when Palo Alto makes announcements, like, which acquisition was this that you're rebranding, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's nice to kind of have the map, right? So Palo Alto Networks in November of 2019 acquired Aporeto, and this is now the leading into the introduction of Prisma Cloud, which is based on that acquisition. It includes features such as data security and delivers data loss prevention capabilities, offering discovery, classification, and malware detection for AWS S3.
It also has cloud posture security management, which is the Evident.io/Redlock acquisitions. They actually acquired 2 CSPMs.
Right.
Evident.io didn't work out so well, so they went out and bought Redlock. So I think it's primarily based on Redlock. So that's in here. They've got cloud workload protection platforms. My guess is some of that came from Twistlock.
Yep.
Because they also acquired Twistlock, right? So piecing the rest of these together, Paul, you're starting to see, these series of application cloud container security companies are really the foundation of Prisma and now Prisma Cloud 2.0. This has always been the big question, kind of how all these things came together. This is the best summary I've seen
of how it comes together.
All these pieces coming together. Yeah.
I will say usually DLP in this context in your cloud posture management system is usually a DLP light, relying heavily on tagging and things like that, which, I mean, we've covered in some webcasts. The Secure Circle folks, I think, really paint a nice picture of the pros and cons and limitations to that tagging, which I thought was interesting when I had never really dug into DLP in any way, mostly because it kind of got a bad reputation, right? We're seeing a resurgence of it. It's a feature in some of the cloud security vendors, but I think to really do it, you got to look out in some of these more forward-thinking vendors, because I like Secure Circle, and the one other one that does it in email, Material.security. Yeah, Material Security. Yeah, that's like they really thought about the DLP problem, and I think have a much better point of view and solution for that.
Yeah, and we've also talked to Gamma Networks about this a little bit, which is kind of a different take. These are some of the 3 emerging data security plays we're seeing that are moving away from the old traditional DLP solutions.
Classification and tagging, right? Which is
correct.
Yep.
And even overlap into the CASBs, because the CASBs say they do DLP, but it's DLP light because, again, they're tagging it, but you need some other system for the enforcement side. So CASBs are doing kind of the light version of DLP discovery and tagging also.
If we were a big analyst firm that starts with a G, we might have one of those quadrant thingies and call it DLP light. Right. Let's see. eCentire has launched a cloud automation security assistant. And this is interesting. Inside of Microsoft Teams is where you kind of collaborate on the analysis of this data, and they say they can manage alerts and launch automated threat configurations for Microsoft Cloud Application Security, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Azure, and Microsoft Graph Security API. And for those playing their bingo card at home of all the Microsoft products and the name changes, that ticks off a lot of the Microsoft bingo if you've got the Microsoft bingo card. And you need a new refreshed one because they just renamed everything.
Right. You do. Under Defender, I believe, is kind of the predominant brand that a lot of this is going to come under.
It's Microsoft Defender and Microsoft 365, which is interesting because they're losing that Windows. They've dropped that Windows moniker from there, which kind of gives us a little bit of insight maybe to where Microsoft is, I believe it was Corey that brought this up earlier, and we'll talk to Corey in just a bit, that, they're playing the long game. And and this wasn't Corey's thought, but I'm like, if they are, rebranding it to Microsoft means they can apply that to any operating system now. I think we've really seen this shift of Microsoft not just applying its productivity products in all of that, but their security products now going cross-platform.
Yes. And we were talking about a little bit, you got Defender on Windows, they embed a Linux kernel, then they port Defender to the Linux kernel. Now you have pretty much full coverage across the stack. Does that change the EDR vendor environment, which will be interesting?
Now all they need is Defender for macOS.
Right. Well, it's Linux based. So how close are they?
They're BSD. Well, they were largely BSD based, in my understanding, but very different. And all the different versions are different. It's a pain in the butt to support macOS, actually, in any capacity like that.
But they're heading down that path.
I think
to the point where you've got Defender and ATP and some of these other things running across multiple platforms. You start to change the landscape a little bit on the endpoint side, which I think is interesting, right? But you still see these MDR companies, these managed detection and response companies. They may use an EDR. They might use these native Microsoft products like eCentire is. I believe Deepwatch is as well when we talked to Corey in the third segment today. But they're bringing the services to it. They're bringing the resources to it. They're making it actionable at the customer side that may not have the resources to do this. So I think the MDR play is the long game, but what you're using as your EDR might change, actually.
Yeah. Speaking of endpoint technology, SentinelOne has secured a patent for their unique approach to uncovering exploits. It says the patent is a combination of 3 separate SentinelOne innovations: automatic feature extractor, code detector, and position-independent code detection that significantly enhances what they're calling XDR, which we've talked about, their XDR platform detection capabilities. Not too much in the way of details of what all those things actually mean, but kind of interesting nonetheless.
You can go. The patent numbers are in there. So
you can go read it.
Go read them. Go right ahead. I've written 2, I think, in my career.
Yeah, they make your brain hurt. Yeah, big time.
Oh, yeah.
So it was kind of interesting. And patents don't necessarily mean it's the best solution for you either. Could be.
Definitely not. I mean, it's part of their intellectual property where they believe they're extracting value in their solution over others. So when you have innovative capabilities, you patent them, you protect that intellectual property, and hopefully that provides you value against your other competitors at some point. So, yeah, makes sense.
Akamai launches a new API security tool. The API discovery and profiling capability automatically and continuously delivers APIs based on a scoring mechanism that takes into account response content type, path characteristics, and traffic patterns. Would call this also a very light version of API security. There are firms that specialize in this. This sounded to me more like you can monitor it and more of like a discovery and classification for your APIs, which is important.
If you think what Akamai is, it's basically a big WAF with a SD-WAN in front of it kind of thing, right? So they see a lot of traffic, and if they understand that they're the traffic coming through is to an API endpoint, they can do some level of discovery, some level of monitoring against that API traffic. We saw very similar feature capabilities from Signal Sciences, also doing that at the API level. Then you have very specific API security vendors that are building deeper integration into the API, what the functionality of that API endpoint's supposed to be.
Salt Security was one that we briefed with.
Yes. Yep. That's one. There's a couple others in the space.
There were. I briefed with another one. It was, I think it was a French company. They were really good at it too. In Sequence?
Yes. Sequence Security's doing aspects of API security.
Yep.
There's a couple others. But I mean, look, we know there's a proliferation of API endpoints all over the place in these highly distributed applications that are being moved in, out, all over the place. And so APIs have taken on a much bigger role in how communication's happening at the application layer. You're seeing a lot of vendors focus on API security because APIs are out there. They're open endpoints in most cases. So how do you secure them, protect them, provide authentication to them? So there's a lot of areas in API security that have to be addressed. This is some great capabilities. I don't know how they're pricing it. If they're giving it away, fantastic. But there are also much more pure play API security companies. Yeah,
because you really have to dig in. And I was having some conversations, I think, with Tyler about what's available on the various API endpoints, for example, in Microsoft 365. And if you get certain responses and pieces of data, figuring out how critical that may be in terms of if it is a vulnerability and how critical it is that that information comes out is somewhat subjective. And that's why I like the vendors that dig deeper into API security, because I think you've got a much better chance of identifying the real vulnerabilities in your API. It sounded to me like Akamai is giving you an API security light to just classify and discover, which is not bad. You may use both, right?
If you don't know which API endpoints you have, how are you going to
secure them, right? Yeah, it's back to that old vulnerability management problem, right?
Yes.
What else looked good in here, Matt? There was quite a few product announcements this week.
There were. Tenable did this announcement on Tenable Lumen again. And I started reading this, and the only thing that's available now is this concept of remediation maturity, where you can baseline your remediation timelines with peers and best practices available now. Everything else in here is not available till the end of Q4. So why is there a press release talking about all this? Again, we've seen aspects of this Lumen. It was announced 2 years before it was actually ready. Then they had some capabilities. We dug into it. It was interesting. Now they're announcing updates, but 2 of the 3 updates aren't even available yet. So why do the press release now? Why not wait until it's ready? Anyways.
Tenable's trying to solve the problem that others are trying to solve as well in the space. We did a great segment with Vicarious last week on Paul Security Weekly. And what I garnered from that segment was just how subjective the vulnerability scoring and prioritization is. We sat in the panel of very seasoned professionals that have been doing this for a long time. Some of us working in vulnerability management. All of us have worked for an organization in the blue team role as a defender on the security team. and understand the problem. And what we came down to was it's still very subjective. There are a lot of factors very specific to the organization that you have to take into account. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to run through those and really kind of, you don't want to leave it to a gut feeling. You want to have more to sink your teeth into when you prioritize the vulnerability and the remediation. So I thought that was one of the better discussions we've had, and the Vicarious team did a fantastic job of gamifying it. They had a poll, and they showed us different factors, and we got into discussions like, do you patch the CEO's workstation or the assistant to the CEO, and what level does that carry? And then if the vulnerabilities in the browser, how exploitable is it, in all of those things?
Well, we're going to talk to Ed Bellis right after this in the next segment. Yeah. I mean, parts of the research that they've been doing, Kenna's been doing this for a long time too, looking at different aspects of prioritization, looking at predicting whether vulnerabilities are going to be exploited. I know they're using math under the covers to actually do some of this stuff. So we're going to get another kind of insight on this. This looks like a standard benchmarking capability where the more predictive scoring mitigation stuff is actually not released yet. So again, to my point, why a press release now versus in like 4 to 6 weeks from now?
Which is interesting because Vicarious has that already. I know I'm plugging them in. Again, they are a sponsor, obviously, but they have that already. I've seen it in action. It looks good. It makes me want it, actually, for us, to be honest with you. That's when we engage. That's part of the reason how we love our sponsors and choose our sponsors to an extent is that I'm like, if I hear it, I'm like, I want that. That's a good indicator, right? Again, that's a gut feeling, right, as well sometimes. But when we hear about some of those features that gets us excited, that's usually a good indication that they can solve problems in the real world.
Right.
Anyone else on here you think might be solving problems for real people in the real world?
Let's hope so. Let's see. We've got the TiVo Networks folks coming on to Paul Security Weekly soon, and we've seen a number of announcements from them and in different enhancements. This one's around identity access management control. When they get on, there's a lot of questions I think we have for some of the things that TiVo's been doing, because we've covered them probably once a month for like the last 3 months or so of additional enhancements to their platform. And I think them coming on as a sponsor to Pulse Security Weekly will give you and the crew an opportunity to really understand all the improvements that TiVo's been making and how they're using deception here across the board for these different use cases. It's hard to extract it out of some of these articles, so I'm excited to get them on and actually hear it from them.
Absolutely. Splunk has an announcement. They're helping security teams modernize and unify their security operations in the cloud, according to Splunk. Cloud native updates, a lot of cloud in here.
Yeah, because people aren't on-prem anymore. Who's hanging out in the office, right? So now they have to make all these capabilities that they had primarily on-premise available in the cloud, so people can gain access to it if they're not sitting in the organization anymore. So I think you're going to see a lot of traditional on-prem technologies start to build cloud-native, SaaS-based variations of their products to support this more remote kind of style workforce with not a lot of people sitting in corporate environments right now. We did cover on Monday the Security Weekly 25 index, and we know that Splunk missed on the revenue expectations the last quarter, did fine on profitability. So again, a little bit of pivot, a little bit of shift, because they have to continue to figure out how to keep their base and their revenue streams happy.
CyberSaint also had an announcement in here adding automation functionality to its CyberStrong platform to reduce manual intervention. If I think back to one of my first experiences with auditing and compliance, it was a very manual process. There was a manual questionnaire. Plextract has spoken to this as well. And automation in that area, I think, is very good, because I think we still, in order to guide our security program, need these manual audits to kind of gauge in general where we're at. So I think they have a place in our security programs, and automation in that area, I think, is super useful.
Yeah, what's interesting is,
and they're a sponsor too. Sorry,
they are a sponsor. It's funny, we did an interview on Application Security Weekly, I think a couple weeks ago, and it was an advisor to a couple of these companies, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're a sponsor, they're a sponsor. He goes, yeah. He goes, as soon as I saw their data model, I was in, right? Because having built a GRC platform and knowing the limitations of a relational database structure and what we were trying to do with that database, I know the challenges of the GRC scalability and automation challenges. CyberSaint has done a lot to address that from a database architecture perspective that allows them to do some of this stuff, which is why that this unnamed person is an advisor, because he's like, yeah, as soon as I saw the database, I knew I was in. So I thought that was an interesting comment.
Oh, I like CyberSaint. Now I remember they're all the same CyberSaint that I did a couple of informal briefings with one of their marketing folks at conferences. So glad to see that they're a sponsor now, because I like their approach, and they were really working hard to solve problems for people. So that's good. Awesome. Cool. Well, that rounds out the news for this week. A couple more stories in there. Make sure that you check them out. Interview with Ed Bellis coming up next. CrowdStrike stops breaches. These days, critical work isn't done from the protection of a corporate network. It happens at cafes, back offices, and at home. New ways of working mean new attacks. New attacks require new defenses. CrowdStrike stops breaches so you can do what you do best. CrowdStrike, we stop so you can go. CrowdStrike is offering Security Weekly listeners 15 days free access to its platform. See how it works at securityweekly.com/CrowdStrike. Can we continue to function without facts? Cybercriminals exploit the absence of facts, harming organizations through the easiest point of entry, email. No company should claim they can stop all phishing attacks. It's about having all the facts in seconds and reducing the time it takes to respond. It's minutes versus hours in the difference between a security incident and a breach. Greathorn. See through the dark. To learn more, go to securityweekly.com/Greathorn. Data protection is a top priority with today's work-from-home workforce. However, current data loss prevention tools inadequately protect data in cloud or SaaS offerings from insider threats. Secure Circle automatically protects data as it leaves SaaS services such as GitHub, AWS, and Salesforce. The protection is transparent to users and works with any application to persistently protect data, even source code. Secure your data with Secure Circle's Zero Trust Data Protection. Begin your 30-day free trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Secure Circle. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join Amit Barakat, the co-founder and CEO of Perimeter 81, and myself for a technical deep dive into the problems inherent in legacy VPN technology. We will explore solutions for the modern workforce and how momentum towards perimeterless architecture is helping redefine the future of cybersecurity. Register now by visiting securityweekly.com/Perimeter81. This segment is sponsored by Kenna Security. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. Here with us today from Kenna Security is Ed Bellis, the co-founder and CTO. Ed Bellis is a security industry veteran and expert and known in the security circles as the father of risk-based vulnerability management. Did you come up with that all by yourself, Ed, or did you have someone else?
I promise you I had nothing, in fact, nothing to do with that.
But it's kind of true. I mean, look, Ed, you and I have known each other since, 2009, I think, when you were a customer at Qualys way back in the day. When you started, not long after that, was it Risk.io? Was the original name right before it was Kenna Security. So, I mean, look, Ed, you were really early into this market.
That's fair. Although let's be clear, there's a little bit of hype around that title.
So, Ed, it says you founded Kenna Security to deliver a data-driven, risk-based approach to remediation that we'll talk about today. What's interesting is I don't want to say I knocked, but I definitely questioned your name change. And I have to say, coming out of it now, I also knocked Richard when he said IDS was dead. Turns out he was right. Turns out you were right, too, because I think there's too many companies with the name Risk in them, and I think you've done a great job solidifying your brand. So
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and that was kind of the requirement. Now, we didn't necessarily completely change our name, I'll say, by choice. But when we did, one of the requirements was, hey, we want to be far field. I want to not walk the show floor of RSA and be confused with every other vendor that's out there. So Stay away from risk, stay away from threat, stay away from a lot of red and black colors.
Yeah. We had to change our name. We kept the red and black colors, though. So
that's
someday we'll compare notes over beers. So Ed, you've done some studies recently. So you've completed one. You completed 5, actually, and you're working on a 6th one. If you could kind of set up the labs and research that you're doing around these various topics, because I think there's a lot of interesting data points to dig into.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Paul. So we have been publishing a series of joint research reports with the Scientia Institute. So if you're not familiar with those guys, Wade Baker, Jay Jacobs, Ben Edwards, Dave Seversky, effectively a lot of the former Verizon DBIR folks have went off and formed their own research firm.
Oh, that's where I knew Wade from, because I've interviewed Wade on the DBR. Yeah.
Speaking of the godfather of the DBIR.
Right, yes.
I'll just throw that out there. So we've been working with these guys for a number of years now, really. And we've published, to your point, 5 different volumes of this prioritization to prediction research report, focusing on different areas, obviously, within the vulnerability management space. The first couple volumes were, in fact, the first volume was very much around what I would consider almost like the academic view of vulnerability management, in the sense that we're looking at the definitional level, so CVEs and what's in the National Vulnerability Database and how that compares to exploits in the wild and that sort of thing. And then we started with volume 2 to start to take some of the more real world data, started to consume information from our customer base, right, across roughly about 450 different enterprises to see how they were doing in various forms. We started to introduce through volumes 3, the concept of remediation performance metrics, right, and how that differs from risk, and we can talk about that a little bit. And then ultimately, with the most recent report, volume 5, which we released earlier this year, it was more about comparing some of how the vendors themselves were doing, right, and how easy or difficult they were making it for their customers to perform remediation, to reduce risk, to kind of take a better approach to vulnerability management. And we can dive into a few of the things that we found there. But needless to say, we're heads down right now, actually working on volume 6, which is starting to turn up some interesting facts and stats as well.
Ed, I want to dig into some points on Volume 5 because it takes me back to both when I was a defender and working in vulnerability management. And the question that sometimes is posed is, do we just fix things because we know we can do it very fast, very efficiently, and at a large volume? Or some of the metrics that you measured in there. But, all the other factors aside, and there are many, as you well know, if we can do it really fast, really good, and a lot of the time, do we just do that? Like, how does that factor into your prioritization?
We absolutely do. And I think a large tribute, I would say, goes to Microsoft. You guys were talking about Microsoft earlier. One of the things that they've done very well for their customers is made it a lot easier to just patch and remediate vulnerabilities, right? So while the unfortunate side of it is they kind of had to do that out of necessity because of the volume of vulnerabilities that they are actually introducing.
In 2003, 2004, they certainly had some really good reasons to do that, right?
Yep, absolutely. And it's even, we see it even today. I mean, in terms of the absolute volume of vulnerabilities that are introduced on a month-to-month basis within a customer environment, Microsoft still leads the pack, right? The vulnerability density on Microsoft platforms is much higher than others. Now, some of it is historical. Some of it is the fact that they are a general purpose computing platform, right? Which in itself makes it difficult because it's not only Microsoft vulnerabilities you're talking about, it's all of the applications that are running on these multi-purpose machines.
Sometimes it's lines of code. I mean, they're just more lines of code than anyone else.
It's a huge, complex set of products that they're managing, and then on top of that, all of the software that's running on top of them. So, but to their credit, right? The remediation velocity, and we measure really 4 distinct performance metrics, right? There's coverage and efficiency, velocity, and capacity. So coverage, you can think of it, and we think of it in terms of risk, obviously being in the risk-based vulnerability management game. If I have 100 high risk, and in this case, when we're doing the research with Scientia, high risk means vulnerabilities that are either have some sort of weaponized exploit for them, or we're seeing exploitations in the wild for both. If you have 100 high-risk vulnerabilities, how many of those did you fix? So if I fixed 80 out of 100, then I've got an 80% coverage. Efficiency is the opposite of that. Think of it as I went out and I fixed 100 vulnerabilities. How many of those were actually high risk, right? So how much of my effort really counted towards banging down that risk level? Velocity is just that. It's how quickly am I remediating vulnerabilities? And one of the things that was really cool that we kind of introduced, I think it was volume 3 of the series of reports around velocity, is looking at it through a different lens. Instead of typically you'd see in this industry, a lot of people are looking at things like mean time to remediate, which is great. One, it's averages, so it doesn't necessarily mean a ton. but also typically mean time to remediate is only looking at things that you actually remediate, right? So you're not looking at all the stuff that you just didn't address at all. So looking at survival curves, right? So if I had any given vulnerability across my environment, how quickly do I eradicate that vulnerability until it completely goes away, right? And then, I think Qualys has talked about the half-life of vulnerabilities in the past, and that's definitely in there as well. But ultimately, what you want to measure is that area under the curve, or how quickly does that drop off and get eradicated out of my environment. Now, of course, we find that in any sizable environment, the answer is never.
Yeah, because they come back, right? And it's a time. I think we talked about in comparison to how we measure some of our podcast statistics, and you have to measure it on a time series. And vulnerabilities are the same way. Like, it comes out, there's a lot of activity, and then there's kind of this trailing off. And we measure our podcast very similarly, and we realize that it's really a time series. I think vulnerabilities have to be measured in a very similar manner.
You're absolutely right. You can't just look at any point in time. And that goes to, also kind of the differences between risk, which you should look at risk in terms of a time series as well as my risk going up or down.
Right.
But then these performance metrics, which are not necessarily risk feeds into those performance metrics, but really what you're looking at is how well is your team doing at remediation, which can be different, right? I mean, my risk could jump up tomorrow because a lot of exploitation events are starting to pop up, right? That's not the fault of your team. Now, your team needs to be able to respond to that, but that's not, performance is different than risk.
Yep. There's a lot of interesting things to measure the various teams, and that's a common question that we get is, how do I measure the effectiveness of my various teams for managing the Active Directory infrastructure versus our web applications versus whatever else? How do I measure the effectiveness of it? The time series plays into it. Are there other tips you have for our listeners, Ed, as to some of the best ways to measure the effectiveness of your remediation programs?
Yeah. I mean, that's just, and I was getting into it, and I guess the one metric that I didn't talk about was capacity, which is another thing to look at, which is effectively how many vulnerabilities, and really you still want to feed risk into all of this, right? So we talked about coverage and efficiency, and that's natural play into risk. Obviously, when I'm looking at velocity, I want to look at the remediation velocity of high-risk vulns versus low-risk vulns. Also, you talked about it earlier on your segment, but it's not just about the vulnerability. It's also about the asset that vulnerability sits on. How important is that asset? What business processes are associated with it? How is it, interconnected within my own environment? Those all go into play there. But there's also this notion of capacity for teams, and how many high-risk vulns can my team actually remediate in any given time frame, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, however you prefer to measure it. And really what you're looking for there is, am I getting ahead, or am I falling behind, or am I treading water in terms of high risk? Meaning, am I actually closing out more than I'm opening in a given time frame, or the other way around? Am I introducing security debt, or am I reducing security debt?
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your debt? I wanted to ask Ed, something I've been thinking about based on some previous segments that we've done talking about prioritization, is the age of a vulnerability. How does that factor in? Because I think it's somewhat subjective based on your environment, based on a lot of different factors. But do you patch things that are newer, or you patch things that are older? I think you can make a case for both, conceivably, which is bad, right? We want to be less subjective about this and more like, just patch based on a formula, and less than, I feel like we should patch older things as a higher priority over newer things.
I think that feels good to us from an engineering perspective, because I want to continuously be updating my environment, because it makes, let's be honest, by getting into some sort of regular patching cycle, that makes future patching easier, right? If I skip patching for a long period of time, the chances I'm going to break something in the future when I do ultimately patch that go up, right? So in that sense, I would say it's more operational risk than security risk. But there is security risk, and I think security risk is really what you have to consider here, right? So when I'm looking at it through that security lens, I want to remediate the thing that's most likely to happen to me or have the biggest impact, or the combination thereof, right? And if I have a vulnerability that's been open for 3 months and something gets opened yesterday, but that the chance of that thing that opened yesterday is much higher in terms of either exploitation or big impact to my environment, I want to jump on that first, because I want to manage the risk as opposed to the age. Now, there is a very valid point, though. Age represents operational risk, right? And there's patching, which also introduces operational risk, which is different. And a lot of times security people look at it through the security lens, and the ops team is going, hey, the chance of something going down by me pushing out this patch could go up, right? So there is that sort of risk that you have to keep in mind as well.
Matt, I'm sorry I'm monopolizing the interview. I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this topic, obviously, because you and I have had several conversations about this topic over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think his answer on age is right. It's based on risk, right? I don't care how old or new it is. What I care about is it going to create impact in my environment? I want to go back to capacity for a second, because I think capacity gets interesting. There's been a long debate about aspects of how do you improve capacity for patching? How much does prioritization and automated patching and other activities help improve capacity? And so I'm curious, I don't know if you measure it specifically, but are we seeing improvements in capacity, Ed? Are there innovations happening that are allowing us to increase our patching capacity to resolve vulnerabilities? Or are we still pretty kind of like status quo?
No, actually, that is one. So we measure those 4 things on an annual basis, and internally we kind of refer to them as the state of the union of vulnerability metrics in terms of performance. And capacity specifically, we have seen significant improvements. In fact, if you look at the P2P reports, right, from volume 5 versus I think it was volume 2 or 3. We almost flipped that chart, right? So meaning if you're looking at the charts, there's the number of folks that are falling behind or introducing more debt than they're remediating. And the other half of it is the people that are getting ahead and actually paying down debt. And then in the middle, there's kind of a slice that are treading water. The number of folks that were falling behind now are, so I think roughly well over a half, maybe even close to 2/3 are either treading water or getting ahead now, versus it used to be the other way around just a year before. Now, caveat is bias in the data set, and that these are all Kenna customers, right? So they're going to be focused a lot on high risk and paying that down. We did see 2 things that obviously affect capacity. One is effectively what we do, which is the prioritization angle, right? If I'm narrowing down the set of things I need to focus on in terms of risk, then my ability to pay that debt down goes up. But then you talked about it, right? The automated patch management, that's huge. And why we see in volume 5, the net capacity of like the Microsoft platform far exceeds when we looked at things like
Network devices, was that one of the, that's a weak area, right?
Yeah, really weak area. Now, to be fair, they also introduce a minuscule number of vulnerabilities compared to the general computing platforms. But not only the capacity, the velocity was massively different, right? We would see on average, people would fix those network computing devices, or the half-life would be somewhere around a year or longer, versus Microsoft, which was much, much faster.
Also, I mean, in networking, you have Cisco Works, which is the most ironic name for a product out there, so we won't fault people for that either. That's my opinion. That's not what Ed's saying. That's my opinion.
I'll just nod and
smile.
So, I mean, the good news is we're actually improving. We are getting to levels of automation in this area, which means we are reducing our overall potential risk profiles and postures across the organizations, because automation is helping us get there. I mean, I've worked for 2 of the 3 major players in the space. This was always kind of the nirvana. There were very few willing to go there. And so you've seen other solutions come in. But if you build your vulnerability management program end to end, thinking about aspects of automation, remediation, and patching in mind, that means you can achieve good outcomes.
Yeah. In fact, in I think it was volume 3 or 4 of the report, we looked at some of the vendors and some of the velocity around specific ones. Microsoft, which we've talked about a lot in terms of how quickly people are eradicating vulnerabilities there. Google was obviously another one. And auto update means a lot there. I guess the one thing that I found a little bit humorous is that Microsoft was slightly faster than Google. And when we look back at all of the Google vulnerabilities, I mean, the vast majority of them were Chrome vulnerabilities that we saw, which meant that people were actually pushing out patches through things like SCCM faster than they were restarting their browser.
Right.
Huh. Interesting.
Volume 6, Ed, what can we expect in Volume 6?
Yeah, great question. So this one, what we're doing is we're taking a deeper dive specifically on exploited vulnerabilities, whether it be vulnerabilities that have weaponized exploits, either proof of concept or more point, click, and shoot type exploits, but also those that are being exploited in the wild. And we're taking a deep dive into timelines, right? So you look at this vulnerability, when was it published by, when was the patch issued by the vendor? When did we first see any sort of weaponized exploit for it? When did we start to see exploits in the wild for it? When did we start to see it show up in vulnerability scanning results from our customers? How quickly did they remediate it? And then where are all of the gaps, right? And how could we reduce some of the gaps for the defenders, right? Whether it be on the vendor side or on the practitioner side, where are those areas of focus where we can say, hey, in this particular type of vulnerability, we're seeing exploits come out very quickly. In fact, much quicker than somebody is typically patching. Where can we make improvements there versus other ways around where there might be long-lived exploits that come out well after patches, and patches are actually pushed out.
Now, Ed, is this research specific to there is an actual living exploit versus a vulnerability which may have a very high severity rating, but it doesn't require an exploit? Authentication bypass, just as an example, it's exploitable, but I don't necessarily need code to exploit that. It's an authentication bypass, right?
That's right. And this is very much focused on the former, not the latter, right? We're looking at things that are not just exploitable, but there is some sort of exploit for, or you can detect an exploit for, right?
Okay.
So that's kind of the key there. So some sort of signature as well.
Yeah, because I would think if I don't need an exploit, that would automatically trigger a much higher severity because there is no exploit required, essentially, right?
Yeah, and there's some bias in the data there, and the fact that there's some vulnerabilities that where you can't necessarily detect an exploit. Mm-hmm. So us being able to, tie that to anything goes to nil, right? I don't have the ability to tell you this is being exploited in the wild because it's not detectable.
Right. We should still give a higher priority to vulnerabilities that have exploits out there. There's some debate on that usually, but it's still a thing, right?
I think it's a generally good rule of thumb. It's not like you were talking about earlier in the segment. It's not the only factor when you prioritize a vulnerability, but it's certainly a factor, and it's a pretty big factor.
Matt?
Yeah. When you lay out your timelines, are you taking into account the vulnerability disclosure timeline as well? Because here's what we see, right? Vulnerabilities identified, disclosed to a vendor, goes through a period, doesn't become publicly announced until later. Are you taking some of that vulnerability disclosure timeline into an account? Because I'm curious, how big is sometimes that gap from the time a vulnerability is known and it's patched and available and announced to the public? Because that's a gap window. Are you trying to analyze that in this phase as well?
Yes, with caveats. So that data is not always available. When it is available, we definitely include that as part of the timeline. It's also interesting because the number of CNAs over the last couple of years has just exponentially grown. So the number of people who can actually publish and create a CVE now is massive, right? And we've seen that in the historical graphs of, oh my God, there's way more CVEs last year than there was the year before. That's just because more people are actually publishing CVEs, and now you have the advent of folks like GitHub and things like that are scanning and creating CVEs as well. So there's a lot more data out there, including some of the disclosure data.
Yeah, it's just a gap I see is you see these public announcements. You're like, this thing's been around for like 90 days before they got to patching it, right? That's a potential exploit window if there is a known exploit available for it. So I was curious because I think it would give us some really interesting data on how well is vulnerability disclosure programs doing in the industry, right? Are they helping or are they not helping?
Yep, for sure. And we do see there are a number of them where you actually see the exploit being published before the CVE is published, which is obviously not good for practitioners.
Right. Ed, any closing thoughts for our audience? Timeline for Volume 6, when we can expect that, for example?
Yeah, so we are heads down in that now. We'll probably go in through our usual QA cycles starting next week and expect to publish that certainly by mid-November. So we're about 3 weeks out. You can go to kennasecurity.com where we'll hang that off of there, but also kennaresearch.com is where we have a lot of our research reports as well.
Fantastic. Our listeners can also visit securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. We archive all of the segments with our sponsors there individually. So, Ed, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
CyberArray for Teams was built to help organizations stay ahead of today's evolving threat landscape and to meet today's most difficult security challenges. Fortune 500 companies like Amgen, Booz Allen Hamilton, Plexus, CVP, Fannie Mae, and Vizio, small businesses worldwide, and several branches of the U.S. military use CyberArray for Teams to close the skill gaps that put their organizations at risk and to equip their workforce with the skills to defeat their security adversaries. CyberArray for Teams. Problem solved. Visit cyberarray.it/solved to solve your training problems. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/Chronicle. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Learn how to build an integrated security platform on our webcast on October 28th. Also on November 5th, we'll show you how to build proper metrics and KPIs. Learn why you should stop trying to discover and classify data in our webcast on November 12th. Lots of fun webcasts coming up. securityweekly.com/webcast/on-demand for the archive. This segment is sponsored by Deepwatch. To learn more about Deepwatch, please visit securityweekly.com/Deepwatch. As head of product at ExtraHop, Corey Bodzin brings over 25 years of experience building outstanding teams, products, and solutions in the cybersecurity space. He is also a self-professed culinary nerd and is currently at Deepwatch. What is your title over at Deepwatch, Corey?
It's CTO, but
CTO.
I love my friends still at ExtraHop.
Right, yes.
You got the plug in for him.
Got our order of operations mixed up. Corey is the CTO at Deepwatch and a longtime friend of both Matt and I. You and Matt go back longer than Corey and I, but it was a pleasure working with you at Tenable. I'm glad we get to do these things now. So.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking with you guys. And Matt and I have a little game of tag on who starts at a company and who follows. So we'll see who's next.
But now you're at Deepwatch. Right. Tell us about Deepwatch.
Now I am at Deepwatch. Joined about 6 months ago from ExtraHop, fantastic company. But I joined Deepwatch, also a fantastic company. We do managed detection and response. Help our customers with security services so we can help them get a hold of their SIM. We offer managed firewall services, managed vulnerability management, some of my favorite companies there like Tenable and Qualys, and just generally help make sure our customers are secure.
Corey, one of the things we wanted to dig into, and it seems to be a really hot button topic. I know it's a really bad way to kind of set it up, hot button. I can't believe I said that. But when we talk about SIM and we talk about data sources, I've spoken in the past about my enchanted quadrants of where I believe you should pull data from to be able to detect indicators of compromise. Those being the network, the endpoint, your traditional kind of SIM sources you're logging from wherever, cloud servers, on-premise servers, wherever, and also threat intelligence. What I believe we're coming down to today is being able to really hone in on the specific sources within those buckets, right, that give us the best visibility and the highest rate of success to detecting indicators of compromise today. In your opinion, Corey, I want to dig in and get your opinion on where we should be focusing on, where Deepwatch customers are having the greatest success as well.
Yeah, well, I love the way you used hot button because you pushed on one of my hot button issues there too. You're right. There's a ton of data out there. I do like, I think Anton Chubakin coined it, the SOC triad of the data sources. Enchanted Quadrants is really good too, because all that data doesn't really help you unless you have some context, you have some information, you have the threat intel to know what it's telling you. yeah, when we talk with customers, so we just had the privilege of meeting with a number of our customers and CISOs at our customer advisory board, Deepwatch, and they said a lot of the same things I've heard for years from customers of there's tons of data out there, but what's the data we need and how do we actually use it effectively? And so at Deepwatch, that was a problem we were trying to solve even before I joined. Our Lens product, which we released, we quietly released around Black Hat, talked with you guys about that, but we're doing a full-on release for it right now. It's really designed to help answer some of those questions based on what we see with our customers and what's out there in terms of our expertise with the industry is what are the data sources that are most important to give visibility to some of those things? What kind of coverage do you need? What kind of analytics do you have to be able to use? And what are the ones that are most important to advancing your security program forward versus what are the ones that are nice if you have unlimited budget, if you have unlimited time, but maybe are not so relevant. And you're right, Paul, I love how we stay very focused on the cost to collect those things, what kind of analytics that can help you with. Will they help you find lateral movement? Will they help you find compromised credentials, things like that? Is it data you can easily get, right? For a lot of people, getting network data can be a challenge. Maybe you factor that into your decision-making. But what ties it all together in your enchanted quadrants is you have to then have some way to make profitable use of it, and threat intelligence really helps there.
Absolutely. Matt?
But the industry says I have to build a data lake, Corey, and that means I have to collect all the data, put it into this big data lake, throw something over the top of it, and analyze it. I mean, that's what the industry tells us, right?
That is absolutely what the industry tells us, and how convenient that some of the people loudest about that stand to profit on it. I can't help myself. I always talk about food. When I started making bread, there were all these rules that you had to follow as well. And when I came across the no need process, which was something that was saying, hey, you know what? You don't need to do all that additional really hard work, sweating, grunting, spending 15 minutes, moving the dough around. If you just mix it up and give it a little time, it'll come together on its own. That sticks with me every day. We hear from our customers, look, I'm consuming all this data. What do I do with it? And we say, well, honestly, while all that DNS data you're pulling in, it's fantastic. It's reasonably voluminous. And while there are some nuggets in there, there's an awful lot of noise. We might suggest pull in your Active Directory data, pull in authentication data from a provider like Okta. That'll give us a much clearer picture of what a normal activity day looks like for Matt Alderman, and then allow us to hone in on things that look really unusual for Matt Alderman that we might want to go track down and make sure everything's okay and it's not indicative of some other problem. To Paul's point, right? When you have good threat intel, and we can talk a ton about the definition of that, it helps you even refine that further to, Matt Alderman, I know he travels, he logs in, he's working at all hours of the day, but this particular login is to a system he's never logged in before, and it's using some protocols that feel like some things that I've seen in a threat, an IOC component, for example. And so maybe I really want to pay extra attention to that, even though it might be on the fringe of what's normal for Matt. I have some additional context to tell me, check it out more seriously.
Are your outliers sticking out more if you're collecting the right data and not overwhelming your analytics engine, Corey?
I think they are. I think that absolutely helps. My experience at a couple of companies is that there's a definite hierarchy. I'll only say it once. It's going to make me roll my own eyes to say it, right? Machine learning.
Sure.
But there's a hierarchy to machine learning, and the kind of lowest levels are just finding outliers. The thing about outliers is, especially in our industry with activity, everything's an outlier. So if you're relying on algorithms at that level of sophistication, that doesn't mean they're not valuable, but you can dramatically cut the number of false positives or the number of things that are anomalous but interesting but aren't actually a problem by adding some threat intel on. Right. As you move up that chain, and you get more sophisticated, you can start really honing in on what really is an outlier, and not just an outlier with, here's an outlier in Matt's behavior, but Matt does that all the time. But Matt's an executive, and here's what all the other executives look like as well. And so now here are the things that are outliers in terms of just regular executive behavior, not just outliers in Matt's normal pattern.
Yeah, I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, and I think that if we structure around looking for outliers and then looking at frequency of events is essentially what you're talking about, right? The top talkers, the least frequently occurring events, and putting some lenses around that when you're collecting it from Active Directory. Is that a pretty standard and valid approach that we tend to overcomplicate?
I think it is, and again, not to tie it too much back, but that's actually in Lens. We're really proud of our now patent pending maturity model, which takes into account a variety of attributes about the data sources you've got and the coverage and what you're doing with them, and helps you understand the real value you can use. And to your point, we give these top maturity recommendations within Lens. Here's the one thing you should do that'll make the biggest impact to your security program. And more often than not, this is not a rocket scientist type thing. It's not you need to deploy some algorithms, you need to get out on SageMaker and figure out what you can do. It is, we have some basic patterns that are unusual, and we could be finding a lot of problems in your environment if only you would go through the effort of actually getting the proper logging really turned on for more than 20% of your environment. If only you could get some endpoint out there. I think in your last segment, right, Ed was talking about the fact of if you could only focus in on the couple of important things as opposed to trying to collect everything. Those are great ways to start that are basic, but have an outsized impact in your ability to secure your environment.
I've seen so many different methods of collecting telemetry from the endpoint. One of the common denominators that I'm coming down to that I really like is Sysmon. Are you good collecting Sysmon from your endpoints, looking at your Active Directory logs, and then using some software such as Deepwatch and a service to look at those? I mean, that puts you in a really good position, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fantastic. At Deepwatch, we allow customers to bring all sorts of log sources, the two you mentioned. Of course, we have a managed endpoint service. Somebody wants to use a CrowdStrike or a CyberEase, and even better. Sure. There is some tuning there, right? Sysmon, same sort of thing. It can be an awful lot of data in a Windows environment. You could have a lot of things going on. So you want to make sure you can make profitable use of that. Just collecting the data is a great way to spend money. But if you're not throwing the analytics at it, why are you bothering? Having said that, there are certain data sources that are better than others. But any data source you can collect easily, any data source that you're well positioned for, and any data source that's situationally appropriate is a really nice one to start with. At our customer advisory board, we had one of our CISOs from a manufacturing environment. He loves endpoint. He loves collecting the data off the endpoint, and he does that in his administrative areas. But he's also got manufacturing floor where there is no opportunity for that level of endpoint data. And so network data becomes really critical in that case. Log data becomes more critical just because it's available and it's what you've got. So I think you're right. Depending on your unique environment, and what your business and your risk surface looks like, you can make there's some low-hanging fruit items that you can grab and you can make great progress. And for more specialized environments, there's still low-hanging fruit. It just might require somewhat different technology.
Matt.
You've used the term profitable twice, at least, maybe 3 times. I'm assuming you mean that the value you're extracting from the data is greater than the cost of collecting and storing the data. Is that your definition of profitable? Because it's a very interesting way to think about profitability.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We are well past the days. One of my favorite email taglines years ago used to be Richard Clark bemoaning the fact that most enterprises spent more money on coffee than they did on information security. I think we're past that now. I think boards, companies understand that they have to spend a substantial amount for their own data security and data care. But having said that, we're still a long ways away as an industry from being able to actually talk about the value you're getting. And so I like using the term profitability because it resonates with business people. You make an investment, you have a certain amount of money you put in, and then you eventually hopefully get a lot more money out. I think that's the same sort of viewpoint we should take as security professionals, is that there are things we're going to do that we're going to invest some time in, but we expect to see enough value that we're turning a profit on collecting that. And there's so many products and data sources that could do that, but as they're implemented, they don't. They suck up a lot of resource. They maybe don't deliver a lot of value. And again, without hopefully it being too much of a shameless plug, that's what our maturity model and lens really try to help you sort out, is what's the most important stuff you should do. Not that everything isn't great, but some things are more easy than others to turn that information security profit on.
Yeah, especially if you don't have the resources, the processes, the maturity. You could buy a product, it could sit on a shelf or not get deployed. It's not providing any value, but you spent money on it. Therefore, it's not profitable. It's a loss.
That's right. That's right. One of the fascinating things, and my peer, Wes Mullins, who's our CIO and CISO, he has an incredible playbook of, here are the metrics I look for, here are the data sources I need. We modeled a lot of what is in Lens based on his feedback. And when we go and we talk to customers, and when he has the chance to be in front of customers, there are a lot of people who are really sophisticated in certain areas, but say, I really would love some guidance and some stories of what works for you. So I think I'll be super happy if our product can help foster even more of a conversation in the industry about, here are the things we do that actually do make a difference, that we can make really effective use of, and do more of that. And the other things, maybe they're appropriate for your business as well, but maybe start with the basics. Turn that information security problem.
I love that, Corey, because I think as security engineers, we get excited and we're like, I can go collect data from over there. I just learned this new technique. I saw this tech segment on Paul's Security Weekly. We can go collect that data. We should go do that because that's really cool and exciting. But what we need to do is step back. And what I've gleaned from what you've said in both preparation for this segment and in this segment is, when we look at our data sources, to look at and evaluate them based on their effectiveness and their value, the level of effort to collect it, the cost I need to collect it or store it, the reliability. You also mentioned something that I took a note on, the configurability, which is not a very great word, right? But you said you can collect Sysmon, but there's some tuning that you need to do there too. So how configurable is that source? All those have to play into your decision to go, I'm going to go spend some time and money and effort on collecting this data.
Yeah, amen. And that's one of the other things I really liked that made me so excited to join Deepwatch. Deepwatch uses a squad model where you have the same people are always working with you. And one of those components of that squad, they get to learn your business, but we actually have somebody whose title is a detection engineer. And their job is to take a look at that data, to understand you as a business. What risks do you face? What are the real things you want to make sure you're solving in your security program? And then they go and they do that configuration. They tune the knobs to make sure we're pulling in all the data we need and none of the data we don't, so that we can be good stewards of the dollars people are spending on their data ingestion budgets. Whether you're using Deepwatch or not, if you don't have somebody whose job it is to actually take a look at all the stuff that's out there and pick the things that are really going to move your program forward, well, you should have somebody doing that, because that's where you're gonna. That's really where your profit or loss is going to come in, is in how much time you invest in getting that configuration right.
And it speaks to efficiency as well, because in previous lives, when I was looking at this data, defending an enterprise, in this case it was a university, there was a lot of overlaps. I could get to the same result by looking at my NetFlow logs, or I could look at the raw packets, or I could look at some server logs and basically derive the same answer. And maybe there was another team, the network team was also looking at flow data as well, and they were deriving some of the same answers. So let's not duplicate effort, I think, is a really good mission to have and to review if you're in this process of looking at your data sources, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's not duplicate the effort, and especially let's not spend money on duplicative efforts.
Storing the logs, the same logs to give you the same answer, storing them twice, right? Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Matt, more questions for Corey along these lines?
No, I think we've answered a lot of them already. Deepwatch took a Series B recently, Corey. So kind of what's next for Deepwatch? I mean, as you think about the broad strategy for the organization, do you take Lens and continue to build out capabilities? Kind of what does that next set of things look like?
I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah, we're really proud. Last week we announced an investment from Goldman Sachs of Series B. They're fantastic partners, so we're super excited, and that'll really allow us to accelerate a lot of our efforts. We're doing a couple of really important things in the R&D organization that I think are going to be very impactful. We talked a little bit about Lens. We released that around the Black Hat timeframe. It's out on our website. Go check it out if you haven't already used it. But we've got a second revision of that is actually going to be in a mobile format we're pretty excited about. It will answer some problems that are important enough we think people are going to want to have it in the palm of their hand. Things like when I have incidents that are aging that need attention, things to help me understand the data sources I'm using and their impact on my data ingestion budgets, where my license is at. Even more information about my level of maturity compared to my peer groups and what things I really need to do to, if I want to improve my maturity, not just adding data sources, but what recommendations my squad wants to make, what threat intel briefings we've got, things like, zero log on a couple weeks ago. People want to know. They want to know what it meant and et cetera. And so part of this investment will really help us accelerate Lens. And you'll see some really exciting things this year as we release our second major release. We're also going to really spend a lot more time, not only with our customers, expanding our customer base, but with some data scientists and security researchers helping us improve our maturity model.
And the goal is to make it better than Google Photos, Corey, because we talked about the phone analogy, which I thought was very good, because sometimes I collect all my photos, to use the analogy of collecting all your logs, and then I try and use Google Photos, and when I search, Corey and I both agree it's about 80% accurate if I want to go search for something. Maybe 80% of the time I get the answer I want.
And it's worlds better than it used to be. So yeah. I don't want to slam them, but I mean, anybody who has kids, you can start measuring your photo volume in terabytes once they're born. And the problem is most of them you want to throw away, but you need a way to get those incredible moments back. The same is true. The same is true with the data we collect from information security. There's a lot of stuff there that you can make great use of in cyber, but then when the time comes and you want to use it, getting it, having it ready, and using it is tough. So maturity model helped point you in that. We're going to improve that, but you gave me a perfect segue to our third item we're really investing in. It's a project with codename Deepwatch Discover, but it's an analytics tool that's exactly designed to do that, to take in data that we can take in a reasonable economic way and help find some of those hidden insights that you wouldn't otherwise have. Here's something going on that looks weird. If we take it back to the Google Photos analogy, I love when it pops up, do you remember when, 7 years ago today, you had your kid's birthday party and remember this photo? That kind of thing in security would be fantastic. I don't want to go 7 years back, can't do anything about that, but I would love somebody taking my data sources to say, hey, just looking over the last 24 hours, there are a couple of squirrely things in there. And don't worry, we've got our squad threat hunters looking at it for you. But if you want to ride along, here's what we're seeing and here's why we're concerned. That's our Deepwatch Discover product that won't be available for sale until next year, but we are bringing early access customers on now to help us really refine that idea of what are the insights I need? How do I figure out that, hey, there's important stuff here and I want to start paying more attention to these types of data. I want to make sure I'm collecting more. I want to make sure I'm tuning it as best I can. And I want to make sure I'm getting the most mileage out of my spend on collecting that data.
Corey, as always, it's a pleasure having you on our shows. Enjoyed the discussion today. Folks that want to learn more can go to securityweekly.com/Deepwatch and learn more about Deepwatch and engage with the team. Corey, again, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking with you and Matt, and look forward to one of these days when we can all be in an actual room together.
Right, me too. With that, that will conclude this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see everyone next time. Thanks for listening and watching.